So now I'd like to turn to a few broader questions in our discussion, focused on the upcoming United Nations Conference. We've touched upon some questions here in your talks, but perhaps you can explain a little bit more about your personal expectations for Rio+20, Federico or Andrea. Lauren, you've already mentioned some. On GDP, Federico, how do you feel Rio+20 will address your question?
Well, as I already mentioned, it's great. It's that like limitation of GDP were officially recognized by the zero draft of the summit. So I think that also the public opinion is pretty aware of the problem so far, because there are like many organizations, not only the institutions, but also at like a more local level, that pushed a lot the public opinion on this topic, and there are like even interesting examples of involving the civil society as a whole, even the common people that maybe in the past you were not expected to say a lot on these issues, that were being involved in constructing like new ways to look at the well-being of society and the way to measure it. I think that, yeah, as Lauren said, maybe institution will not do much in the short term, but because as we know, we are facing like one of the worst economic crises, so we are still pretty linked to the old-fashioned way of thinking about the deficit and need of GDP growth to restore the nation's budgets. But I think that the partnership with the civil society, stakeholders, social partners will be very useful to also from a GDP and beyond perspective.
Great, thank you, Federico. Andrea, you spoke about the involvement of young people in events such as Rio+20 and in the sustainable development debate. Do you have any suggestions for how young people could get involved, or any further ways for them to join the discussion? How would you recommend for an individual to come into this?
My point is mainly not only about discussion, but it's about getting things done. And the starting point is a demographic one. If we look at the world population, we reach 7 billion inhabitants, and more than 50% of these 7 billion are under the age of 30. Most of them are located in developing countries, and if we look at those ones that are growing faster, they are actually having an average age which is pretty low. So there is a huge potential, globally speaking, about the role of young people in these countries, but also in terms of international partnerships, because we live in a world in which especially young people, but not only, especially young people are very interconnected. Our stories are interconnected. A children in India may have no shoes, but a Facebook profile. So the national boundaries are blurring, and also, we are able to have multiple identities, which means that being based in a continent doesn't mean we won't care about another continent. Now, if this is the starting point, and if we talk about Rio+20, there is a good chance for a global youth movement for sustainable development to actually diffuse worldwide, to become more interconnected, to become more aligned, because there are a lot of coalitions, a lot of movements, but there is no real alignment sometimes. And of course this is not an easy endeavor. But the most important point is to connect these youth movements with the current generations of leaders. So we need an interconnection of different generations of leaders. Why? Because we are complementary. People who are more experienced have a different type of expertise and different type of networks. Young people who may be less experienced have the capability to think out of the box. They can be a source of fresh inputs, and of course they also have different networks. So this complementarity needs to be empowered. This is how things can be actually happening. So it's not only about discussing together, but after the discussion, we need to get things done. So at this level, the role of governments is important, but the role of the individuals is important as well. Individuals as consumers, as producers, as innovators, as entrepreneurs, as educators, as civil society, as many other things that I can list. And I cannot remember all of them right now, right? But all of us in the end will be also mothers and fathers. So we will be the ones transmitting new values and beliefs to our children. So our future is at stake, and the future of our children is at stake. So that's why we need young people to be empowered by empowering the complementarity of different generations.
Thank you, Andrea. Lauren, your optimism for Rio+20 might not be as high as it could be, but are there any further causes that you feel are worthy of support? Or is there anything in particular with Rio+20 that you feel can be a particular success?
Well, I guess it depends what I hope and what I think. I'd really hope that there would be some substantial movement towards a greener economy, because I think that it has to happen now. There's no space for negotiations in 2, 5, 10 years. There have to be decisions which are made. So I hope that governments, intergovernmental organisations will understand that. But as Federico said, the current economic climate is very difficult at the moment, and states have got other priorities, so we'll have to see.
All right. I'd like to thank you all for a very interesting and fruitful discussion. Thank you for coming, Lauren, Andrea, and Federico. And be sure to check out the Rio+20 subcommittee event on May 31st, correct? All right. Thank you so much for coming.